All right, we got one more session before we break for lunch, and this has to do with leading tech teams in a remote setup. And to talk about this, we have Damiano Tieto, a site lead and engineering director at the Taiwan Development Center for Carousel, and Nadine Yap, chief product officer at The Parent Inc. To lead the conversation, we have tech exec and author Aliza Knox. So I'm gonna leave the stage and leave the introductions to Aliza to lead. So please enjoy the session.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aliza Knox, and I'm joining you remotely. Unfortunately, can't be on the spot today, and I'm very excited. I'm going to bring onto the screen to introduce Damiano Tieto, as Nat said, the site lead and engineering director for Carousel in Taiwan. I think with that cue, you guys are going to let him into the room. Yep. And then Nadine Yap, chief product officer at The Parent, who's also going to come on screen. Terrific. Nice to see you guys again.
Great to see you.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah,
I think
hi,
Nadine
everyone.
is actually on site, right?
Yep.
So you guys might find, for those of you on site, you might find Nadine in the hallways. So today what we want to talk about is how to lead tech teams in a remote setup. I don't love the word remote. It makes me feel like everything's far away, or, in English, remote also means aloof. And so I think what we're really talking about here is dispersed, because of course, all of us who've been working in APAC for some time tend to know that we have people we're working with in a different country. And although there's a distance between us, we tend to be able to figure out how to bridge that. And so Nadine and Damiano are experts at that, particularly when it comes to product and engineering. So today we're going to listen to them tell us how to really make it hum. So the first thing, I'm going to start with Damiano just because he came on first, and also because his name comes first in the alphabet, since I have no better way to pick. Can you just tell us a bit more about your role in the company and your responsibility at Carousel, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hi, everyone. So at Carousel, I am playing both the role of the site lead for the Taiwan Development Center and engineering director. So as a site lead, I basically take care of all the colleagues that we have in our office in Taiwan, which is people from different functions, mostly from tech, let's say engineering and product. And as an engineering director, I look after a few domains that we have in Carousel, like our investment in e-commerce, or what we call core marketplace, so buyer and seller experience search. So these are the my responsibility in a nutshell.
So just a little bit more before we switch to Nadine. How big is your team, Damiano? And are they all located in Taiwan, or are they in different places?
Yeah, well, okay. If I look at, let's say, the Taiwan office, we are 50ish to 50ish people, but they are not all reporting to me. If I look at, let's say, my org, they are around 40ish people, and they are, let's say, 1/3 of them is not located in Taiwan. It's either in Singapore, the majority, or in India, where we have another development center.
All right, before we get into the heart of the questions about that, let's just understand your context, Nadine. Where is your team? How big is it? What is your role in the company and your responsibility?
Cool. So I started as the chief product officer at The Parent Inc. about 2 years ago, right when the COVID lockdown started. So I've not met the majority of the people in the team that I work with.
Maybe they're watching you here to learn your secrets.
Possibly. At the time, product design and tech reported into me. Now, happily, we have a chief technology officer who is also located in India. Most of the team, we have about 60 people in India, most of them on product and tech. And then we have people in Dubai, Bangkok, Jakarta, and Singapore. We did have one in Hong Kong, but no longer. So yeah, that's the role, and that's where people are situated.
All right, and while you're still highlighted on the screen, Nadine, why don't you tell us, what do you think are some of the challenges of leading and hiring tech teams remotely?
Well, leading and hiring, I would say, especially when you're when you're coming in and you don't know anybody and you don't have the opportunity to sort of really meet people casually. Every time you meet people, it's intentional, right? And so you miss a lot of the informal communications, going out for coffee, going out for drinks, and also being able to sort of listen in informally to sort of conversations that are going on. I think sort of a lot of learning and innovation happens that way, cross-team conversations especially. I find that the biggest challenges have been when you're really trying to sort of implement or change process and culture. So getting people to kind of understand why you're doing what you're doing and how you're doing what you're doing, and sort of to have that sort of iterative feedback to make sure everybody isn't misunderstanding and is on the same page, and is going generally in the right direction. The other sort of really challenging thing I would say is with junior people. So, you know, I found if I'm managing remotely fairly senior people, it's a lot easier because we're already kind of in the development methodology cycle. But with new people who sometimes have never been in a work or an office environment before, how do you really kind of introduce them to the team, get them to feel a part of the greater team, and sort of really understand the bigger picture, and really kind of, you know, get all of those different kinds of learnings that happen informally, you know, even if you do a great job with more formal learning experiences.
Yeah, I actually like the point about the feedback loop that you mentioned. I think that is particularly important to get a pulse of how things are actually going on the ground, in the sense of, let's say, what people are perceiving of what you have been sharing them. Because yeah, that's the challenge of communication. It's always both, let's say, in being able to for the message to be delivered well, but also to be fully understood well. So yeah, I agree with that. It's quite critical.
Do you guys change your styles between managing remote and managing in the office? Like, how do you do that? So Nadine, you said, for example, there's no social interactions. So you must have some for the people you do see now that COVID's over. Do you try to replicate those at all for the people outside? Or how do you, you know, balance what you do for remote and non-remote, or dispersed and non-dispersed?
Right. I still have teams in the different countries. I'm really happy to be on site with folks in Singapore and really do a lot more cross-pollination. I don't, on my day-to-day kind of Zoom schedule, don't tend to be speaking a lot with the, you know, regular sales and campaign team as much as I do with my product and tech team. But when I'm in the office, there's a lot more interaction that goes on. So I still definitely have to maintain a certain amount of, it's really kind of taught me the value of speaking not just to the people I always have to speak with, but also some ongoing one-on-ones with not just skip level people in my team, but also sort of people in other teams that, you know, who are my stakeholders, for example. You know, just last night on Wednesday nights, for example, I have a product manager sync session. You know, I always have it with a glass of wine because I can't take my team out to drinks after work. But you know, in Dubai, it's still only 2:30, so they can't really start there. But it is a session where we deliberately don't really have an agenda, and it is partly getting to know each other. You know, what kind of cartoons did you like when you were a kid, or in your country or in your culture? And then, you know, some amount of, hey, you know, this process that I introduced to the different squads, how's it going in your squad? and with people also saying, hey, I ran into this problem in my little group or in my project. Does anyone else here have any kind of suggestions? So it's fairly free and easy. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd never sort of really done a regular kind of fireside chat sort of after dinner drinks type Zoom session with my teams before, and I'm continuing with that one for sure.
Yeah, I think on our side, we also introduced a lot of new casual catch up for that we let's say remote or fully online that we didn't have before. I think I also have lost the opportunity to crack jokes in the office now that we are almost everyone remote. So the part you were saying earlier about the conversation are much more intentional. That's very true. And yeah, so we introduced in different teams. Each teams has introduced their own way to actually do sort of, let's say, everything but work type of casual catch up. I also noticed myself extending the duration of my one-on-one dramatically, especially with those people that I've never met in person. So I bet that for you, Nadine, that is probably for everyone. But yeah, that's one thing I've noticed doing. Yeah.
What do you think about people's mental health and how this kind of remote working impacts them? Do you find there are any issues around that or around the performance difference between people who are remote and who are in the office with you?
I mean, a lot of our I would say the more serious mental health challenges were often around the problems of the pandemic itself and family issues, where it's a new situation. People don't necessarily know what to do to solve the problem. How can we help them to solve the problem? And they're stuck in quarantine or in lockdown. Fortunately, I think sort of across the different teams, there were different degrees of impact depending on what their home like work environment or home situation was. Especially at the beginning where everything was super locked down and the moms had to also sort of have their children at home and had to kind of do the multitasking. That was particularly difficult for some people. And I also know that especially in, for example, the sales team, the salespeople really kind of derive energy from each other, and they really enjoyed. They were always the first ones to come back into the office when there was the lockdowns lifted. On the tech teams, is a little bit of the reverse, where you're trying to sort of encourage people to be in the office and so on. So mental health assistance or other assistance like paying for meals sometimes or paying for kids online kids classes for some of the people who are parents to sort of help them keep their kids occupied. So those are some things that sort of we definitely sort of tried and experimented with. And we also did, mental health sessions with mental health professionals, yoga, meditation, all kinds of different things to just try and keep people engaged and to know that we're thinking about them, right? And to help them understand that it's not. We all know we're in the same boat,
Right.
And
it's interesting because one of the challenges that's spoken about is that although the pandemic gave us flexibility of working from home, a lot of people used to say, well, I won't bother Damiano or I won't bother them because they're at home, it's the home time. And now there's no kind of boundary because, of course, they're all at home, or everybody was at home, you guys were at home. And so it was like, there's no boundaries. And so there's this kind of comment that work seeped into 24/7. So even though you're more flexible, people sort of assumed you would work all the time because you're always at home. So did you see any of that, Damiano? And did either of you guys worry about that or help people set boundaries? Or how is that, working now that some people have that office home boundary, but some people do not?
Yeah. That's very serious, actually. And the way, let's say, the way I do, or the way that I make it very clear to my team is that I do not expect anyone to even respond to my messages outside working hours, and therefore they should not even expect me responding outside working hours or outside the hours where they said they are available, because of course if we are in different time zone, that might differ. And I try to encourage people. For example, I try to tag my messages whether they are urgent or not, and most of them are not. Or I use a lot of snooze messaging, or let's say send later, so that if I happen to work in the evening because I want to, and just I want to send some messages, then I just send, okay, deliver later. But you were asking also about how to detect that, and how to respond to that when our colleagues are actually probably not setting clear boundaries. That is a bit more difficult, at least from my side, to detect. So I try to let's say to see their activity outside of office hours, or I try to let's say get to know them a bit better, understand where these needs come from. I mean, it could be that I have colleagues that are more productive in the night, for example, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a bit difficult to understand how far you are from something more serious. So it's always a bit of a challenge to try to read how our colleagues are doing.
For those of us in tech, we do have, tools that allow us to see, when did you last check in code? When are you green on Slack? And, when did you last update your, your Confluence page and stuff like that? So it's actually not too hard for me to see what different people's patterns are. And not so much for this company, but in a previous company where we were, it was a real-time communication platform, and we had a lot of US clients. We had people working a lot of very weird hours. But because you kind of know the productivity levels of, what they're producing, I always really stressed, if you were up at 4 troubleshooting a client's problem, I don't want to see you online until you've been able to sleep a decent amount.
So it's interesting because Damiano, you're originally from Italy, right? And I think Italy, Germany, and Portugal have actually enacted legislation that says, you can't reach out to people at certain hours to try to deal with this. So I don't know if you're covered as an Italian citizen, Damiano, but I think living in Taiwan, you may not be. So
I'm not covered, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay. So guys, one of the things we talked about was maintaining. Well, actually, let's go back because Nadine talked about tools that you use, that you can see whether people are working. But let's talk about those tools in a different way. Which tools do you use that are best for collaborating with your teams? You mentioned Slack. We've talked about email. Tell me, each of you, what tools you use to really keep those bonds with your team and coordinate well.
Well, for us, of course we use Slack for messaging. And the risk there is that everything is happening on Slack a bit too much. So then we use the for collaboration. We use all the Atlassian products, so Jira, Confluence, and so on. Definitely, let's say for ticketing, documentation, and so on. But we also have the Google Docs. And of course our designer have their Figma and collaboration tool. So we have plenty of tools, and actually each team can even add. There are people prefer using Trello rather than Jira, and it's totally fine. But yeah, these are the major tool that we use when we collaborate with each other. Yeah, email of course, but yeah, we try to set some guidelines about which type of information should be sent over Slack, which type of information should be sent over email. We store all our documentation, for example, only in Confluence, and we use docs where actually live comments and actual collaboration on the content is more required. But for something that is more permanent, then we put it on Confluence. So we have this sort of guidelines that we follow.
And what are the guidelines, just before we get to you, Nadine, for Slack versus email?
Yeah, if it's something that it's doesn't require immediate so email is for something that doesn't require immediate reaction. It's something that there is maybe more context to be defined, so longer form. And maybe, I don't know, attachments and people that might be involved even outside of the organization, then definitely email is the way to go. Slack is more or less for everything else.
Okay. And is Slack for social? Where do you put anything social that happens at work?
Yeah, we have let's say interest groups there. Like for example, I mean, we have an interesting group for parenting. So we share parenting tips for. We have a lot of parents in our office in Taiwan, for example, but in general at Carousel. So we share parent tips. So let's say, oh, we went to this hotel in the weekend and they are parent friendly, or I just bought these items and my daughter doesn't want them anymore. You guys want. So we do a lot of these things. At least, I mean, I'm a parent, so that's one. We have interesting group for whatever, hiking, sports related, or going to work from cafe. Yeah, I'm one of those as well. Yeah.
That's good to know. Maybe the parenting tips will help the parenting. Nadine can give you a column.
Yeah.
So Nadine, what about you? What collaboration tools do you guys use? How do you set, the criteria for which one's used for what?
Yeah. We pretty much use all the same tool set that Damiano does. I think sort of it really was more around setting the norms. For example, don't directly message an engineer with a product request or a problem you want them to fix. Send an email to this particular group, and there is a process for that, because otherwise everybody was, directly reaching out to sort of engineers, and people were just very confused about what the priorities were and who is working on what. Similarly, I think there was a lot of, there's sometimes a lot of meeting overload, and when should you have a meeting? How should you run a meeting? And what should happen after the meeting? So, there is, some of us have the rule that, like, if you had a conversation around, requirements or design, tech design and stuff like that, and you've made some kind of decision, all of that always needs to be documented. Right. So don't just have a meeting, make sure you have an outcome and make sure that you document it in the right place. And when you do documentation, what is your documentation like? And when I came in, there were a lot of Google documents and sheets floating around. But, I then tried to get knowledge management sort of structure. This is where we do all the tech documentation. These are all the sort of process information and things like that. So, otherwise it gets really messy, and then people can't find things.
Right. So,
and also one other thing is that, like, a lot of people forget, even just 6 months ago you had a meeting, you made a decision, and then 6 months later you can't remember what that decision was, or you can remember but you can't remember why. So those kinds of things, it's really helpful.
Yeah, especially for new joiners, actually. Yeah.
I have so many more questions for you guys, but the audience apparently has questions too. So we're going to move to Q&A, and let's see where that takes us, because I would really like to hear about the new joiners, but maybe. Okay, so Inge is saying, how do you build trust between colleagues in a remote environment? Damiano, why don't we start with you, and then Nadine, you can follow up on that.
Thanks. I think it's a interesting question. I usually actually start from 100% trust with people that I work with. I know we have a pretty high bar when we are hiring people. So if someone got in, I'm pretty sure that he or she knows what they are doing. And that's at least when I work with people. With between people that are working in my team, I always try to put different perspective. If someone reach out to me, for example, and is not sure about or is let's say challenging why someone is or some other colleagues is behaving a certain way, then I try to understand to make this person understand the other point of view. So I think, especially in a remote setup, being extremely empathic, it's very important. So that's maybe something that I try to where I try to bring the conversation to if there are problems of trust.
So dialing up the empathy. I know that people have been talking about the CEO as, instead of the chief executive officer, the chief empathy officer, particularly during the pandemic. Nadine, how about you? How do you guys build trust, especially with new, you talked about, not having met some of your team coming in during COVID.
Yeah, some of these informal, get to know each other as people and not just as roles, I think definitely are helpful. But I think kind of clarity of role and objective, to sort of say, okay, you may be having a bit of a clash now. Let's take a step back and understand why this person is pushing for this and why this person is pushing for this, and what we're both trying to accomplish, and how can we sort of get it accomplished? How can we have a conversation, in a constructive way, as opposed to a sort of an accusatory way? Just sort of clarity and language, how we do language, I think is really important. And modeling it myself, I think really makes a difference. I mean, we all want people, especially, in Asia, for example, sometimes people are a bit afraid to speak up, sometimes a bit afraid to sort of take the decision or take the risk. But what we really want to sort of encourage are people to, I'm really interested in people's opinions. So, but do they trust me enough to be able to tell me when something's not going right, or if they have a thought that's different from mine? I'm always trying to be open and encouraging for that kind of thing.
All right, let's move. We have time, I think, for one more question. Thank you for that, both of you. Mary wants to know, are there any tips for a remote working challenge with a large amount of junior teammates, especially to build a higher sense of belonging and professionalism? So I think you guys touched on that a bit before, but maybe, how did you onboard, let's focus on that. How did you onboard the new junior teammates and building their sense of belonging and professionalism during COVID, or just now when they're remote?
Yeah, for my side, I think I want to echo what Nadine was saying previously about the importance of documentation. It's for new joiners, it's critical, really critical, because they don't know the organization, they don't know the culture. Nadine was also touching about the importance of culture earlier on, and they might be used to a different way of working due to the previous organization they come from. So what we stumbled across this problem a few times, and we are working on it even now to try always to improve our onboarding process. And we realize that the more structured it is, the more touch points there are, and the more clear it is what each person needs to achieve. For example, what are the at any given stage in time? So what are the documents that a new joiner will need to have access to, or to look at in the first week? they are different from the documents that this person will need to look at the first month, the first 6 months, and then later on. As the same as the amount of people he or she will need to be exposed. So trying to structure that and making sure that most of the things are covered up and have as many things as possible documented. I think it's important.
Yeah, even the things that you don't normally document necessarily, you might want to sort of consider documenting, like how do we handle conflict as one example in this organization. Might be different. I draw sort of a parallel to when I first had a kid here in Asia, and we did have a helper. I tried to sort of really communicate how I approach discipline, for example, food, nutrition, all kinds of things, what my expectations are and how I operate my household that might be different from, a more traditional household that they may have worked in before. Cultural touch points, and not just, oh, here's how to set up your environment.
Interesting. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. We have a little bit of buffer time. So Bernard wants to know, how do you organize teams that are not in the same time zone, but so that you can keep work at the same pace? Nadine, why don't we start with you, and then we'll get Damiano. You've both touched on it a little bit, but the working hours and keeping the pace up.
Yeah. I had one more thing from the previous question.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
If you guys are capable of doing paired programming with junior people and senior people, not all organizations are like that, but because in paired programming, the senior person or both people have to really always be talking about their thought processes. That is really probably the fastest kind of way I would say sort of a junior person kind of can imbibe.
So it's almost apprenticeship. Paired programming is like an apprenticeship, osmosis, and not just. And does that work remotely, or do the senior and junior person have to be in the same place?
No, you can set it up and pair program without being.
We recently did even a more extreme approach that we did mob programming, where a lot of people, a group of people, because we had a lot of new joiners joining at the same or at similar time. So we have like 5 to 10 people that have to ramp up to speed. And so we were having more new joiners than existing team members. So the knowledge transfer was very hard.
Interesting.
Okay, so I think these are great takeaways here. Paired programming and mob programming.
Yeah. Back to time zones, though. I mean, if your time zones overlap, those are probably the times for a lot of kind of the meeting, my meeting time. So, for example, since so many people are in India, I get a lot of quiet work done in the morning, and then I have all my meetings in the afternoon, for example. But I used to work with a guy in Toronto, and I used to talk to him sometimes more than I talked to the person sitting next to me at the desk. But we had a regular, I would talk to him at 9 and 9 every day. And we had a really good rhythm going whereby I'm like, these are the issues I face. These are the things you might think about. This might be a customer who might talk to you in the middle of my night. And likewise, in the morning, I would sort of get the download as well as other discussions on strategy and projects we want to work with. So it's about finding that sort of right, those right kind of zones and time slots to get people communicating.
That makes sense. And we used to do like stand-up handovers at Cloudflare for each area of the world, and it was great for those of us not in the programming and engineering side, because if we had, for example, clients who needed help, instead of it waiting 24 hours, our team would tell the Europe team or the US team, hey, can you pay attention to this? So I really liked that as a non-product person. So Damiano, what about you? How do you organize your teams? And after this, we're going to wrap up. And thank you so much to the audience for being so participative.
Yeah, we don't, I think maybe I don't have, let's say, a similar problem of Nadine. Most of my people are in the same time zone. India is only a couple of hours and a half away, so and Taiwan and Singapore are in the same time zone. But for example, I'm going to work from Italy the next month, so I will have that problem. So the part about, let's say, being inclusive and be respectful of each other when people mark their calendars availability and try to overlap that, this definitely what one of the key ingredients. And then one this maybe to link back to, let's say, how the managing style has changed over remote work, is that I found that those, let's say, stand-up meeting, or let's say some rituals that we used to have been shrinked in time. If we think that the same value can be given, let's say, over a message or something. If we can't find a good slot where we are all available, then for some update, let's just make the update in a written form. And we try to organize, back to the how to be effective. We try to organize people based on interest, so they work around the same problem. So then the time doesn't really matter, or the location. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to need to wrap up. We've gone a little bit over because the audience was so enthusiastic with their questions. So I learned some stuff today. I really liked the paired and the mob programming. I think you guys have given us great lessons of what I like to call taking the R out of remote, making it emote, so ways to connect with your team. So it's been really fantastic. I hope the audience learned as much as I have. And we're going to pass it back to Nat, the MC. And thank you guys all for being here. I think you have a break now, but let's listen to Nat.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Nadine, Damiano, and of course, our wonderful moderator, Aliza, for that wonderful session, that very interactive session. Right now, we're going to take a quick lunch break, but we'll be right back in just a bit to decode DeFi applications with Spartan Labs and Multiverse Labs. So I'll catch you then.